such an extraordinary tester, a favorite tester of me actually. It's a bliss, I would say. I guess many would agree with me on this. Marit is a principal test engineer at Valsala. She is a tester, author, and a community facilitator. She has been awarded the two prestigious Global Testing Awards, Most Influential Agile Testing Professional Person 2016 and Eurostar Testing Excellence Award 2020. Alongside, she was also selected as the top 100 most influential in ICT in Finland 2019 to 2021. Indeed, super happy to welcome Marit as one of our keynote speaker in Axiom Summit 2022. Before I hand over to Marit some important housekeeping work that me as a host I would need to do, we would take all the audience questions towards the end of each presentations. So feel free to post all your questions in the Q&A section. Do not post in the chat section, otherwise certain questions would be missed. So make sure you post all your questions in the Q&A section only. So over to you, Marit. Thank you.
Right. I hope my slide is now visible.
Yes.
All should be good.
Yeah.
Good afternoon, Finnish time. Good morning, Uruguay time. Good evening, very late evening, if anyone from the Australia is still around. It's great to be here in this global conference and have this kind of privilege of talking to you about contemporary exploratory testing. And in light of what we just heard in the previous talk, you might be wondering, why did I add this word contemporary to the title? And that is kind of one of the things we'll definitely be talking about in this presentation. So I've been doing exploratory testing pretty much my entire career. 25 years ago, when I started as a tester, the first job that I did, I was given test cases, yet those test cases weren't the only thing I was given. I was given a very flexible budget and an assignment. Go find any of the bugs that matter. Anything that you can find, please raise it. Let's have a conversation on it. And then from that kind of on, no matter what instructions someone else provided for me, it was always my responsibility. It was always something I needed to do to make sure that I am providing those results. And from that experience already 25 years ago, going through various companies over these years, I'm noticing in many cases that we have these conversations about exploratory testing being something kind of that we're adding on top of everything else. So, and it was, for me, it was something completely different. I wanted to spend this talk today on kind of giving you ideas of what led me into thinking this is a separate thing. What are the changes that this is enabling in my current organization, that we are more widely now thinking in these terms, and what are the results that we're seeing out of that one. So going back to roots of exploratory testing, the word. I don't want to give you a long history lesson, but I just want to kind of remind you, where did this whole idea start from? In 1988, this book was published. I haven't actually read the original first edition of Testing Computer Software, whereas the second edition that I started my personal career with, I have read that probably 20, 30 times by this date. And it is a great book about all kinds of techniques and thinking in detail about how do you approach testing. The book itself doesn't mention exploratory testing as in it is a book about exploratory testing. It is only a book about testing computer software, but it does mention in one of the sentences, for the very first time, this concept of exploratory testing, and introducing that as the style of kind of like multidisciplinary testing that considers legal aspects, considers financial aspects, business aspects, human aspects, technical aspects, all of these different things, and requires us to kind of go for the results and pointing out then afterwards that this style of testing was already common for those businesses in Silicon Valley that were making relevant money with software development. So already back in those early days, there was this kind of like a divide in the world in a way, where the product companies would be doing something that would enable, successful business with those software products. And then the contracting companies were creating these safe, very kind of pre-written, plan-oriented ways of doing things. And we needed a name for that more agile style already way before agile was a thing. So we called it exploratory testing. I've lived in Finland pretty much my whole life, and I remember the day when I met Mervi Hyvönen, who is nowadays retired, this grand old lady already from my perspective in that sense. She started working with software development and testing in 1973. She was working at Kela, which is the Finnish social insurance institution, and she said that pretty much her entire career from that day when they founded the first testing unit in that non-profit oriented organization and had the very first computer available in Finland, they were doing this style of testing. Because in Finland, we never had the extra money of throwing into writing documentation that we didn't find valuable, or creating things of kind of like out of just process or someone asking for it. So this whole idea of being very cost aware was something that kind of we were born with, being a smaller country with not so much resources necessarily. So while Kem Kainer definitely introduced the term, I find that this is a very natural way of thinking about testing. And the term is really important in the sense that we can find other people who are thinking in the same way and have the same kind of high level context maybe in mind. Exploratory testing, when we then started kind of as a community, we started looking at it. But what is this 1988 thing that we started talking about when Kem Kainer first came about with that term? We started talking about it, and there were these peer conferences, meetings where people would look at things together. And the big realization that came about is that the essential part of exploratory testing is that we don't separate test design and test execution, because when we separate these two, if we keep these two separate different concepts, kind of like one is done 6 months earlier and the other one is done 6 months later, or one is done 6 hours earlier and the other one is done 6 hours later. In Agile, the cycles just keep getting shorter. If we keep these separate, and if we particularly separate them by the people who are executing these tests or doing the designs and then execute the tests, we're taking away the learning that could happen. We are having a handoff in between, and we're taking away this agency, this power to decide what to do with that knowledge, and having that attitude of doing something, kind of like making decisions with that responsibility towards those impactful results. So this not having that separation is the key to exploratory testing. If you look at it kind of like, you imagine you turn your camera into another perspective. If you look at it as a kind of like all things testing that we give labels to, we have things like security testing or regression testing or performance testing, or like I picked up from Jyoti Mishra's talk today, these specific techniques of testing. Where is exploratory testing in all of this? I find that the exploratory testing is kind of the glue that helps us recognize that there's all these different approaches that might be helpful to us. Some of them we are already aware today, and some of them we are learning as we're listening to these conference presentations. But in the frame of exploratory testing, we try to understand how would those be useful for us in providing the results that we're expected to provide. So for me, this is kind of the foundation of exploratory testing. So then what's this contemporary exploratory testing then? Looking at teams, basically for the last 5 years in particular, I've started to realize that the separation of test design and test execution that we used to have in 1988 that made the core of exploratory testing back then. We are now seeing, with the world around us changing, that the same separation is happening between the concepts of manual testing and automated testing. And for the exact same reasons of learning and agency and having that power to make those decisions and not just try automating somebody else's kind of test cases without really knowing why those exist. For those impactful results, we can't keep these separate either. And we need a whole different way of organizing testing, exploratory testing in scale. We can't separate it by saying exploratory testers don't automate. And then there's these automation people separately, because you can't actually write automation without exploring the application. And you can't really do really good job in your so-called manual testing side without having that automation available to you when we're working in these short cycles. So for contemporary exploratory testing, I find it really relevant to kind of break this barrier of saying that we have different people or different considerations for manual and automated. And particularly, I want to emphasize contemporary exploratory testing includes automation. So you might say it's automated testing, but it's automated testing just like programming the application is, where you actually have to think about what you program before you program it. So you're also designing the system as you're going by, creating the system. And sometimes some of those things you will just end up doing manually because you haven't yet gotten around of creating a script that would help you in that work. And it is really the same thing with any programming-oriented activity that we're doing for creation of applications. So I've been trying to then kind of draw pictures of how do I make sense in the world, like what things must change in the way that we talk about testing so that we could have better conversations about this contemporary style of exploratory testing. And the first one is definitely this pyramid, test automation pyramid. And we keep saying that there's this unit level test automation scripts and API scripts and end-to-end scripts. But those scripts are created by the exploratory perspective. We make choices when we first time run our API tests, whether we want to keep that particular API test as it was now written around, or whether we want to refactor it, maybe change the values of it so that at least, you know, we leave behind some other default than the original default that came with the advice that we discussed with our team's developers. So getting kind of variety into the data, variety into the actions we're doing, all of that is driven by the exploratory, the learning perspective. And we do that on the unit test level, we do that on the API level, and we do that on the end-to-end test level. And it makes sense for us to question whether we have the right things already documented in our scripts and add those. And sometimes it makes sense to create something that we automate and then we throw away. Similarly, looking at the other picture there that I've drawn, you might also think of this as in terms of intent and impact. We often in the world, we talk about this idea that it doesn't really matter what you intended to do if the impact is actually something different. We should be apologizing for the impact we're making on the people rather than our intent that wasn't to hurt someone else. And it's the exact same thinking in terms of where does exploratory testing sit then in this world. The intent of developers get documented in those unit tests. The intent that we understand from the customers gets documented in those acceptance tests. The intentions that we used to have in the past, those are the focus of our regression tests. But the impact, whether we were right with all of our intent, that is what really matters. And that's where exploratory testing sits in this picture. So I prefer talking in terms of attended and unattended testing. Not automated and manual, but attended and unattended. I want to have some way of doing testing while I'm paying attention to other things. I might be creating the next unattended test, while the other tests that I previously created are providing me some useful, not perfect, but useful results. And I might be actually being called to attend based on the unattended tests, failing, giving me a signal saying, kind of like a spider web, come here, look at this. And calling me to explore. And it is exploratory action that I do, trying to understand, why is this test now failing? Is it because the software has changed in a way that nobody remembered to communicate to me? I think that's one of the golden gems that I get out of test automation. People often forget to mention relevant changes, and whatever scripts that I'm attending to then will give me that idea. But also it might be that it's revealing that the intentions that we had in the past are actually no longer holding true. And whether it's me who gets called in or it's someone else in my team, I really like the idea that we are able to share that knowledge and that kind of calling in to attend with our team and do whole team test automation in that sense. And all of this has also then led me into thinking in terms of automation, that maybe we should, like with all testing that we do, we should be aware of the use of time. So when we keep talking about things like automation isn't perfect, we could have used that moment of time into talking about something else. And while it is good to address the concerns that the fears that we may have around learning so many new things at once, it's also actually maybe a better way of talking about things in reminding all of us, including myself, that in 25 years, I've had multiple days when I could have learned this. And I could have, in any of those days, spend a little bit of time just to learn something small about automation. And in the last 5 years, I've definitely used my time a little bit differently and grown in this area a lot. But also kind of like thinking in terms of, I think it was Dorothy who mentioned in her talk today that she can read code, but she really doesn't write code. But actually reading code and noticing you have a typo in some of the strings and then going and fixing it, that's actually changing code. It is part of the work that needs to be happening in the team. So I feel like maybe we should be using our time also in finding the small steps that we can take rather than focusing on the steps we cannot yet take. And every new day in our career forward is a chance of adding more steps we are capable of taking. We don't have to do it all in one big go, but just keep adding things on top of what we already know is a good way of doing things. So all of this kind of what change I see happening in the world, it gets kind of summarized into this idea that what I eventually care for is that we need to have good results out of our testing. The testing needs to be resultful. And when I first started using this word resultful testing, I got corrected on Twitter that restful testing is a different thing, that I have a typo there. It's so close that it's almost confusing. So I'm not talking about API testing here. I am talking about the fact that in testing, we kind of are given the assignment of finding something that others may have missed. And when we are going to find that something that others may have missed, if we had a list of all those bugs that we need to find, and it was, like nicely and easily readable list and didn't require a lot of work to go through and figure out what of that massive list we're going to cover for this particular application, because we do have those examples globally, but it's just so much material that we can't read all of it. But if we had that kind of like small list of all the results that we need to provide in testing, we wouldn't need testing. But we don't have that. So our job as testers to provide those results is to turn that invisible code of the right answers, answer sheet of bugs, make that visible and in some kind of either a system or, well, it might be a test automation that we document our bugs in a way that they won't be coming back again. Again, choosing where you use your time, you might choose to fix a bug and then document that situation in automation rather than creating other elaborate documentation of the topic. So this is kind of the way that I've come to think of testing. So how does that then change the practice in my organization with the teams that I work with? How are things happening? Well, first of all, it starts with the idea that we have a category of bugs. Some of them we can find before implementing. So we should be taking our time on reading and asking questions and clarifying whatever claims are happening before we start implementing, participating in that work. Some category of bugs, regardless of our best efforts, will escape even our own eyes. And when we use the application to test the application, we use it as our external imagination. We are more creative in figuring out what still might be wrong. And my recent measurements on my capabilities on this one, after 25 years of practice, is that about 75% of things I was able to come up with before implementing, given my best efforts in BDD style. And 25% of the problems and things that kind of surprised us and could have been, we could have tried having those conversations before, were still something that I needed to find by testing. And this is just looking at things that I have before releasing, but I am thinking of every single task that we are completing and putting into production, that I am having this kind of like a loop. There's like a tail of every single task that we do, that we can go back to the production and also look at monitoring and metrics and telemetry and make sense of things that can then have an improvement idea for our next cycles of features or bug fixes or adjustments that we are creating on the product that we're doing. We have this idea of wanting valuable information, and any sources of that information are available to us. It means we have to grow as testers. I collected here mostly ideas related to the fact that we need to grow to be more aware of what information matters. Not all information is of the same value. There's time dimensions. Some things are really important for now, some are for future. We're always balancing our work in different time frames. Knowing that we can choose to create a mind map, we can choose to create test case documentation, we can choose to improve our requirements texts, we can choose to add to our automation. All of those are choices, and we make those choices of where we're investing. We need to be aware that every day of our job is that we're investing time in something. And definitely kind of learning to invest time in, I usually just, I look at a white wall for a couple of hours every Friday afternoon, and just thinking about kind of like, the future and what might be coming around the corner, and having that kind of like time for reflection on what do I know now and what I don't know, and how would I find it out? It's also helping me in building these skills in myself and in my team as testers, to kind of become just-in-time reactive to the level that it feels somehow even magical, how we can have something kind of like a test environment, for example, ready just when the feature needs to start to be developed. Because it just takes a while before that new hardware arrives. And if you don't realize that you will have to pay attention to this time dimension, it can give the appearance that you're always kind of just a little late with the things you do. So balancing things and learning to learn really well is how I think we need to grow in the contemporary exploratory testing space as testers. Another thing we need to really grow on, I think, is that we need to learn to be better neighbors. So a lot of times, especially with agile teams, I find that I'm having colleagues that are very focused on my current team right now. And usually it's not just my team that creates the system, there's multiple teams. And it's not that I have to do the work of the other teams, but often testing is the perspective where the two teams come together. We hope both of them work in isolation already just fine. But the testing of them, those two together, the two neighbors together, needs to happen. And it's an easy area to have these, well, I would almost even call them disagreements on who should be doing this. I just this week had this conversation that we had a team A doing a component A and team B doing a component B. And there was this agreement on component A plus B testing, that it would happen in both of those teams with a particular way of sharing it. But there was this expectation that there must be a team C, because it's so-called end-to-end testing, and end-to-end testing just must belong to some other team. So making those good neighbor conversations happen will help you address those problems, that when the problem is found by the team C, which is, by the way, I learned in Twitter, customer, if no one else, then when that problem is found and it's pointed to your team, it's your problem then. So you might want to proactively look into that by being a better neighbor. I find myself in a dual role. I'm a tester, but I'm also a sort of a test manager, facilitator of improvement in many ways. I also collected some of those advices of how, as from a management perspective, I could enable this kind of contemporary exploratory testing. I find that my main go-to way for creating the space in which agency and results are possible is that I make the releases shorter. So it's almost like a signature move now over the last whatever years, that I go to an organization that releases once or twice a year, and I turn them to releasing once a month, and then I turn them to releasing once a week, and then once a day, and until I get to the place where they release whenever something is ready. If they let me stay in one place long enough, I will get to that, even in systems like my previous place of work, where we had almost 2 million users that got affected on their personal computers, not on the common server, but on their personal computers whenever a release would happen. It's just a little different challenge to do distributed continuous releases than it is when you can centralize it on a nice web server. But it is possible, and it's worthwhile. And it's worthwhile for testing, because when we are making changes in smaller scale, it's a lot easier to kind of start from a working baseline, look at the changes we're making, and think around those changes, what testing would we need to be doing? Absolutely the number one go-to mechanism for me nowadays for test management. Instead of having status meetings, I like having sessions where we either co-design or even co-test. Ensemble testing is my absolute go-to method. So when I'm concerned that I don't know how someone is testing, I'd rather pair test with them than review their list of test ideas. Obviously, it's not just only pair testing. Sometimes I like to give people a chance of writing things down in a mind map format, typically, before we go into that pair and execute from their ideas, because different people require different kind of time frames in being in the right mind space to start doing a certain kind of activity. And definitely looking at how am I doing in terms of impact. Reviewing the time that we used and the results is a go-to mechanism as well. Sorry. Then on the evidence part, this is something where my current organization has very strong, I would almost say feelings maybe, but the history maybe is a better word, that tests must be documented in a particular way. And it's been a really easy way of changing that culture whenever I can frame it so that whenever we need to document, we can document that evidence as automation. So when asked to write detailed test cases with steps, I would in any day, for purposes of exploratory testing, write rather title test cases than those stepwise test cases. Rather than ever writing title level test cases, I would always create mind maps. And over mind maps, if I had the capabilities already built up in the team, I would almost any day build automation over those mind maps. So it's not just this or that, but being aware that the group we are working with will have an impact on what choices we're making. And this has been also then, of course, impacting the recruiting and growing the newbie testers into the idea that from day one, when they start on the projects that I work with, they will be writing automation and becoming contemporary exploratory testers. So automation isn't the only outcome, but it is part of the outcomes. I wanted to show you what I think success looks like when automation and documentation in automation is in question. You can see the number of people that are running around there. These are not all testers.
Excuse me, Marit, your screen has stopped sharing. We're not seeing your screen anymore.
Oh, it stopped sharing, sorry.
Didn't know if you did that on purpose or not.
No, I did not do it on purpose. It was accident. Let's try again. So now you should see it probably. It doesn't really matter on the other ones. This one is something you probably want to see, but you can see these like little, characters moving around. This is the whole team contributing to test automation in a team where test automation used to be the work of an individual or a pair of testers, test automation specialists. Everyone is now contributing. And this is the kind of visual that I think in terms of contemporary exploratory testing. It's not that all the work is done in test automation. It is just that there's a lot of work done in test automation. And over a period of year that I have here kind of like visualized with this tool, there's been quite a relevant number of things documented in various different areas. The structures have been changing and moving. And there's a way of making sure that you can understand what the others ended up testing, because you can rerun that test. And if you have open questions because the documentation is off in some way, you can still go and ask them. And if you can't find the answers, you can always do the next step of changing things in terms of that. We thought about success factors for this kind of style from the automation perspective. So in a research project, we kind of came up with these different perspectives here. The stars here are making a mark on my previous project and my current organization. So this listing, we made it with my previous employer. There's one area, telemetry, that we were doing with my previous employer that we don't do in my current work yet. But I believe that one is just a matter of time. And I wanted to kind of point out the organizing, the internal open source community mindset. I've managed to now get away from testers or test automation specialists contributing to test automation and having it as a whole team activity. But I still need to move from whole team activity to all neighbors activity. And that gets even more complicated when the scale grows. Was able to do that in my previous organization, having 3 business lines sharing test automation as documentation that helped us work on a product line. We'll still need a few more years on my current organization. What is different in this style is that if you look at the traditional ways, which are very kind of plan-driven ways in doing test automation, you can't find a document called test automation strategy. It's very much hidden. We have ideas and we can draw them, and they are probably going to be similar from multiple people. No careful tool selection. All of the things we kind of give advice on automation in books generally, this seemed to be very unorthodox. We would add tools, and like Lego bricks, we can take them away if we didn't like them. It's always better to kind of fail towards action rather than be stuck in speculating too much. And we wouldn't be measuring the quality and performance of test automation. We were measuring quality and performance of the products, and our feelings in the team were definitely being have the conversation on. But of course, success and failure, it's always a snapshot. I've spent now 2 years in Vaisala. These are names of all the teams I've worked with so far. I think I've succeeded with 3 teams. I think 3 teams that I work with are still kind of on the verge of inconclusive, maybe successful, but according to my criteria, I might still question the success. So the whole team aspect needs a lot more work there. And there are teams that I work with, I would still consider that they didn't yet manage to get here. There's a lot of work to be done against both entropy, the idea that things get messy if no one is cleaning them up. And there's a lot of work done against inertia, the idea that nothing moves unless someone exerts a force and makes it move. And I find that this is the kind of mindset that we need to have in multiple team members in order to take things forward. Rather than focusing on just kind of this automation or how do we come up with the ideas, I find myself appreciating my colleagues with little kind of like mentions of, I noticed you're really good at this. And I spent one Friday afternoon, instead of my white wall, I was drawing these little images with texts on kind of like badges. I've seen people be relevantly different in this space. We have different skills, and appreciating the fact that some people might be really good at strategizing, but other people will always be the ones who present the most clear and easy to follow demos in all of our demo sessions, because they know how to show the positive sides without missing out on the risks that need to be addressed. Like the different skills that we have as people, this is not all of the skills, but these are some where I've noticed that I don't have all of these skills myself. I have some of these, and my appreciation to my team and my colleagues around me is that other people have other skills. So it's not just one profile that we're looking for in a contemporary exploratory testing person, but it is having something that the local team is missing. And when I talked about things, I really try usually not to talk about testers so much. I try to talk about whole teams. I try to remember and mention, it's still a little difficult sometimes for me, that the programmers are sometimes, in many of the teams, they are actually the best testers in those teams. But it doesn't mean that the other testers aren't valuable, even if there is really insightful testing happening by the programmers. There's just so much valuable work for us to do that we need to share in those teams, that all of us needs to pitch in. And testing is kind of too important to be left just for the testers. I believe very heavily that everyone can test. But in order for us to get resultful testing, it's kind of like thinking in terms of everyone can also sing. And we know, if we've ever been to karaoke, especially in Finland, we know that some people are slightly better at their karaoke performances, and some of them would be maybe even possible to be put on a big paid stage where thousands and thousands of people are ready to pay for it. But if someone wants to become good at singing, and if someone wants to become good at testing, we have all, as humans, we have the foundation to start building on those skills, one day, one step at a time, as long as we remember that we don't just want to provide any results. Even a broken clock would be finding us a result of the right time twice a day. And as testers, we are expected to be more productive, more to the point, regardless of the working role that we're testing from. We are asked to be more to the point with our results than a clock that would be only right twice a day. So paying attention to your use of time and your results is really important. So to conclude this with, my favorite saying nowadays seems to be that testing is really about going, finding some that others may have missed. And we don't know what we're supposed to find unless we find it first. But also this has, to me at least, it has this corollary. In 25 years, I don't think I have been bored yet. When I'm bored, I'm changing something. So when you notice you're bored, it's probably an indication that you could be learning a small new skill, trying to do something differently. And there's other people who can pitch in the important things you are doing right now to make you space to never be bored. We are not alone on this. So thank you on my behalf. I think we should have time for questions.
Yes, Marit. Thank you so much for such an insightful session. Many things it was very catchy. I would just like to highlight two statements that you had showed in the slide. It was very interesting. You can't automate well without exploring, and you can't explore well without automating. It's something like, very insightful. Thank you so much for such an wonderful uh, content that you had showcased us with today. I hope even the audience will be like right now planning to implement this contemporary style of exploratory testing in their day-to-day work. Thank you so much, Marit. So maybe we can take up a couple of questions. We have few questions for you. The first question that goes here is like, how do you manage to give the test automation to everyone in team?
Usually you manage that by one task at a time. So in teams, we have these conversations of who's doing what today, and we can have those conversations of who's going to do things around test automation today. Reminding people on the fact that we don't want anyone to be alone, especially when we talk about responsibility that are handling millions of people or millions of euros. You never want to leave anyone alone. And from that kind of general idea that the responsibilities that software teams are often carrying are kind of big, it's a really important way of kind of saying we need more people sharing this responsibility. We don't want to be alone. So asking and making space in the day-to-day, that's my best advice.
Okay, that sounds clear. The next question is like, in your opinion, what were the main obstacles that blocked your failed teams from success?
I think the communication related things, probably. So we often have very different value sets on what good testing looks like. How am I supposed to do it? And what's supposed to be my role in doing all of this? And when we want to change people's ideas of what they are supposed to do, for example, if you have a developer who thinks that it's the tester's job to collect the pizza boxes they leave in the middle of a living room floor, then unless you figure out a way of communicating that isn't really the hoped for way, you will find yourself collecting those pizza boxes again and again and again because they cannot be left there. There's going to be a big mess and you won't have time for the other things. So a lot of times it's about not having enough time to have the one-on-one meaningful conversations that change the perspective of those individuals.
Okay. Quite interesting. Yeah. So the next question is about resultful testing. Resultful testing with minimum time. How is it achievable?
So usually I would start from kind of thinking in terms of what's important and what are the risks. Having worked with certain developers for a long time, I know what kind of mistakes they typically make and what I need to look after each individual. That's a good rule of thumb for me. I know what kind of things our customers usually complain about if we miss them. So starting from that end might be also good. Different architectures help me prioritize where risk is more likely. So thinking in terms of what do I think others have already done and what's the added thing that I need to do or can do on top of that in order of addressing relevant risks to this product. That's how I at least minimize my time. And then considering how much time you're using on documenting, whether it's mind maps or automation, you can cut your time a lot, but you're going to pay in long term if you cut on your documentation and automation time. So when you leave the organization, you realize that you could be leaving a piece of you behind if you automated. And that was, for me at least, it was kind of the moment of realizing I want to work differently, that I want people to be able to test some of the things I was able to test, even when I am no longer around, because I will always leave.
Yes, very true, very true. Agree. Okay, so the next question. Have you ever experienced that testing is not given priority and management said dev can also do it? If you have faced, how did you cope up with it?
So I also have teams that have zero testers, and devs can do it. I think it's true.
Yeah.
Sometimes those managers are actually absolutely right. I actually believe, my personal belief is that adding one tester into a team of developers who has never had a tester might actually be making quality worse than not giving them a tester at all. So usually when you're adding testers, you might need to add several, because it's really difficult to manage the expectation around what this person will do for you, because people always are thinking of they take some of the work we are doing now away rather than adding something on top. But yes, management has all kinds of expectations, but management are people too. I think Dorothy's advice and Anne-Marie's advice on that today was really solid, on having those conversations and trying to understand why are they asking what they're asking. And again, like for us testers, it may be good to remember that we can continue testing even after it's in production. Obviously, there's the next feature coming, but we might be able to, take away a little bit of time while in production. And if we're just ahead of our customers in understanding things that will fail, we're already providing value.
Exactly. Right, right. I think we are running short of time now. We have a couple of more questions. Maybe audience, like this will be answered later on to you via our website. Again, thank you so much, Merit, for your valuable time. It was quite